Thank you so much, Zaki, and thank you all for joining us for this really, really important webinar, Bridges of Resilience, which was really inspired, I guess, sadly, by the situation that is ongoing in Palestine, and the really desperate crisis that we are seeing. Today, we have a number of esteemed guests who have joined us who have been operating in Palestine as long as 1910, who understand the terrain, the people, but also the impending refugee crisis that is happening. I'm very grateful that we have Marc from UNRWA with us, Zia Salik from Islamic Relief. Unfortunately, we're having some technical issues with Andrew from the British Red Cross, so hopefully he will join us in due course. But to get the conversation started, and if I can come to both of you each with a question, and I'm going to pin you both so everyone can see you. I'd like to maybe begin by actually thinking about the situation that we are currently in. Now, a lot of people have seen the devastating images, the attack on hospitals in particular, as well as the deep need for food, fuel, and the other items. So maybe if I can come to you, Marc, if you can maybe tell everybody a little bit more about the work that you're doing, the teams on the ground, and how they've been impacted by what's happening, and that real reflection of reality and what people are really experiencing.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and having this event with the Muslim Council of Britain. I think the first time we're working together, it was really a great honor to meet you, Sarah, a few weeks ago only in Scotland. So honored to be here and honored also to represent my organization, UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. It's an agency that started operating 75 years ago. So we've been on the ground for 75 years now, standing firm with Palestine refugees through wars, through all the miseries that have happened to the Palestinians and Palestine refugees, including now in Gaza. So what are we? We are an organization working both on development and humanitarian issues. So development because our core mandate is a mandate of support to the population, like a big municipality. We're talking about education to more than 500,000 children in the Middle East, more than 500,000 Palestine refugees who are in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem and in Gaza. We work also, we have a major program, and that's what we're going to talk about today, which are humanitarian, so emergency programs in all those areas. So we're supporting again Palestine refugees through a difficult moment, recently in Syria, through the earthquake, or in Lebanon now with the very difficult economic situation that we all know. Palestine refugees, 6 million people in the Middle East, 6 million of them that we support, that are entitled to our services. In Gaza, those are 1.7, 1.8 million people that are Palestine refugees and that come to us for support. And that's huge. We're talking about 70% of the population that are Palestine refugees that depend on UNRWA, mostly for survival. And that was before that terrible conflict that started on 7th of October. We used to have 300,000 kids in our schools. Unfortunately, and I keep on saying that, those kids are not receiving education now, right? Those kids instead have to find refuge in our shelters. So UNRWA has a huge number of buildings in Gaza, mostly schools or training centers or clinics that have been turned into shelters to accommodate now 800,000 people. 800,000 people. So we're talking about a third of the Gaza population that came to us, came to UNRWA, came to find the protection of the UN blue flag in that very difficult situation. We have 1/3 of the population living in those shelters. And unfortunately, we feel extremely unhappy with what we can give them. Why? Because those shelters were prepared for 150,000 people. And today, with 800,000 people that are cramped in those shelters, you can imagine the conditions in which they are, in which they live. It's not a dignified life. We do everything we can to help, to share the little that we have, to share the bread, to share the water, to share the few medicines that we have, but we don't have enough. We don't have enough of all of that. We have situation extremely difficult whereby people, 400 people share a bathroom. Imagine people queuing hours to access the toilets. So it is unbearable. It's an untenable situation, untenable humanitarian situation outside our shelters and inside our shelters throughout the Gaza Strip. Of course, you are aware that there's now currently like a major military operation by Israel in the north of Gaza. We don't have access to the north of Gaza. We, as the United Nations, we have a number of facilities against schools that are hosting people that have been targeted. Unfortunately, we've condemned that. So people that came to us again for protection, some of them have been killed. We've lost over 66 people exactly who were killed in those horrible attacks. 60 again of our 63 exactly of our own shelters have been damaged and some hit directly, including just a few days ago, the house where our international staff are sheltering have been attacked through a naval rocket, so from a boat. Unfortunately, those employees, those colleagues of ours had gone, but they were luckier than most of the situation. Again, when we look at the figures, we know 11,000 people have been killed so far. 11,000 Palestinians have been killed, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands, thousands and thousands who have been injured as well. So we have little. Again, we are asking for a number of things to the international community. We are asking for the borders to be open. You know that everything is coming through Rafah border through Egypt. That border is not equipped, it's not adequate for the flow of aid that needs to enter Gaza in view of the situation in the Strip. For everyone's information, before the 7th of October, we had 500 trucks, 500 containers were entering into Gaza every day. Now we have an average of 40 trucks. $1.2 million people in the Gaza Strip. Now we would have to feed nearly the entire population of Gaza. So terrible situation. Again, we need also water. You've heard the news that there's no potable water now accessible. I was talking to some colleagues today. They sent a team to Nusayrat camp, so a place in the center of Gaza. Someone lost a bottle of water, and you had tens of people jumping on that bottle of water to try to drink a bit, and they were begging for food and water. Fuel, you've heard about the fuel. Why are we requesting fuel, us and all the humanitarians? I'm sure the colleagues here on the call will also reiterate the call. Fuel is necessary for everything in Gaza. For convoys, we know, clear gasoline that we need to put in our trucks, in our cars. It's also important for bakeries. I mean, we don't do bread. We have agreement with bakeries. Bakeries would give them flours, and they would produce the bread for the population. Fuel also for desalination plants, also for water. Fuel for pumping water from the wells in the south of Gaza, well, everywhere in Gaza. Fuel for also cleaning. There's nothing today. The sewage, we're seeing the sewage in the streets of Gaza, something that has never been seen before. So again, massive needs in Gaza. We need help. Everyone needs help in Gaza. Please, that's also a call for help to support our operations. We need all the support we can get.
Thank you, Marc.
Again, thank you for inviting me today.
Well, it's not over. We will come back to you, but I think what I wanted to kind of convey to everybody after our meeting is that one of your shelters houses up to 600,000 people, and if people are following on Twitter, you'll see the staff, the attacks and basics that you're really providing. So thank you for your work. Good to have you with us, Richard, and apologies for all the technical issues. It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without some of them. And it's a pleasure to have met your colleague, Liz. And I was fascinated when I was doing my history into the Palestinian Red Crescent, which is a sister body of yours, as to how long-standing that organization has been and been set up. And I think the situation that we're always trying to convey is that, you know, Palestine and Gaza didn't just start a couple of weeks ago. It's been an ongoing humanitarian crisis, a disaster of all kinds. So if I can maybe bring you in and just introduce you to those who've joined us today, and maybe just talking about, in terms of that experience from the Palestinian Red Crescent, the kind of longer term work that you've been doing, and just also where you're seeing that critical issue now is for people. Obviously, we're seeing the horror, but what does that actually look like for people on the ground?
Yeah, Zara, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to learning and listening as well as talking tonight. So the Palestinian Red Crescent was formed in 1910. So it has a very long history in providing healthcare and support to the Palestinian people. If I think about the current situation, I mean, it's completely desperate, isn't it? I mean, the humanitarian aid is completely inadequate. What's reaching people, the hospitals being attacked, you know, so it's a very tragic situation. But what is the National Society doing on the ground? Well, they're providing emergency medical support through public hospitals and the hospitals that they run themselves. They have been running up to 2 hospitals, one of which had to close down, which I'll talk about in a minute. They've provided food parcels, hygiene kits, milk for children, safe water to 397,000 people so far, as well as providing mental health and psychosocial support. 4 of their paramedics have been killed. Over 20 have been injured in the line of duty driving ambulances. They're playing a key role with the Rafah crossing, with the Egyptian Red Crescent that's been given a very strong role to sort of help support the provision of aid into Gaza. So far, they have received 1,100 trucks since the 21st of October, which is obviously a huge responsibility. And those trucks are for UNRWA, for WHO, for ICRC, for UNFPA, for MSF. And so these are providing, as well as to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. So the supply, we know it's compared to 500 trucks a day that were going in prior to this recent crisis, is completely inadequate, but at least something is happening. In regard to the hospital operations of the Palestinian Red Crescent, I mean, it's just obviously incredibly challenging. They have treated over 2,000 patients since the 7th of October in PRCS hospitals, but they've had obviously the challenge of shelling in the vicinity of Al-Quds Hospital, causing damage to the building, injuring patients, and obviously the internally displaced people who were taking shelter in the hospital. On Sunday, the 12th of November, PRCS announced that Al-Quds Hospital was out of service. It no longer could operate due to depletion of fuel and power outages, and a lack of medical supplies and a depletion of water and food for the patients. On the 14th of November, PRCS crews managed to evacuate the sick and wounded and their families from Al-Quds Hospital to Khan Yunis. Only 7 out of the 18 PRCS ambulances are operational in northern Gaza due to the depletion of fuel and direct targeting. So that's some of the background to what the National Society is doing at the moment. We also have the International Committee of the Red Cross. We have 100 of their staff in Gaza, including in northern Gaza. They've been providing practical support to the Ministry of Health. They have a surgical team embedded in one of the hospitals in Gaza, trying to save lives. They've provided war surgery kits, intravenous fluids. They're also working to support 9 health facilities covering 10,000 patients in the Gaza Strip. They're working hard to obtain the release of hostages in dialogue with Hamas and other actors that can have influence on that. And as you know, 4 at least have come out, but that's an ongoing activity. And they're reminding parties to the conflict of their obligations under international humanitarian law, very vocally, publicly, as well as behind closed doors. And I think that's a huge responsibility because, you know, it's an intolerable amount of death of children and vulnerable civilians that cannot be in accordance with international humanitarian law. So that's some of the work that's going on at the moment.
No, thank you so much, Richard. And I think we've been seeing in the last couple of days, in particular, very targeted attacks on hospitals. And there's been lots of narratives around that. But I think when you're seeing the ambulances being targeted, it's quite cutting, and it's really good to hear. And we'll come back to you in terms of more of what that's going to look like in the coming times, but also what we can do. Just to bring in now Zia Salik. Now, Zia, obviously, Islamic Relief has been operating in Gaza, particularly during the conflicts, and we've seen the community really outpour and give after every crisis. And I know in particular providing relief, food, but also that compassion and support. And a lot of people, especially in Muslim communities, see Islamic Relief as a real trusted broker for that. Maybe it'd be great to get insight from what your teams are saying on the ground. And again, reassure communities that actually whatever they are giving is really making a difference.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum everyone. Good evening, and thanks for having us as well. In terms of the situation on the ground, it is difficult to kind of add to what's already been covered. I think, you know, the situation is quite clear from a perspective of what's happened so far and what the current situation is. And I think for the first time in quite a long time, I mean, I've been working with Islamic Relief for over 13, 14 years, and then I was a volunteer for over 10 years. And in that time, we've seen many escalations in Gaza. And I think one of the bigger kind of attacks in that period was, of course, 2009, 2012, 2014, and so on. But this time around, it's almost like a minute-by-minute documentation of what's happening, and everybody has their own access to regular updates. And that is, you know, people are more aware, and I guess that's what's driving a lot of the support as well. I think my colleagues from British Red Cross and of course UNRWA have kind of given the dire situation in terms of access. You've just heard there that the PRCS have only received 1,100 trucks since the 21st of October, when some of the first trucks crossed the border from Egypt into Gaza. And, you know, they were welcomed and, of course, celebrated by some. But to put it into context, based on what Marc said with regards to the number of trucks that were going in pre-October the 7th, at a minimum of 500. I think some days it was up to 700, 750 per day. Even at the kind of conservative calculation of 500 per day, between the 7th of October and today, that would have been over 20,000 trucks, and only 1,000 have got in. So that tells you the actual disparity of what the need is. And that was the need before the pummeling of Gaza and its infrastructure and its people. So you can imagine the need being so much greater today than it was just over a month ago, yet the amount of aid that's flowing in is absolutely minimal. Of course, you know, today is another horrific and painful day for us all as we watch the raids on Al-Shifa Hospital, and hearing firsthand the accounts from the director of health services at the complex and the updates that they've been giving us in terms of what's happening to them, their staff, and even the patients within the hospitals. Horrific accounts of what's happening. And it's very easy to lose sight of the impact that we're able to have in these difficult and dark times, because it feels like whatever we do is going to have no impact, because it's such a huge crisis and it's on a scale beyond our ability to impact. So I think what I will do, I know Richard has talked quite extensively in terms of the number of people that they've been able to assist. So I don't want to just reel off numbers. in a similar fashion. But I think the point is that the agencies on the ground are doing the best with what they have. The focus for all of us, humanitarians and NGOs that are working in Gaza, is to focus on the survivors, those that have been killed. As Muslims, we believe that they are shuhada, and may Allah accept them. But those that remain behind, they are our priority. There are hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, people who are now seeking shelter in the UN shelters as well as other areas. And our focus at this moment is to provide them with some comfort and some ease with whatever supplies are coming in through the partners that we're working very closely with. Richard mentioned the Palestinian Red Crescent, and of course, as an organization that's been working in Gaza since 97, we have very close ties with a lot of local NGOs and partners that we are delivering our operations through. And as you can imagine, in the first 10 or so days, we were able to deploy whatever medical stocks were available from within Gaza and get them to the hospitals and clinics. But that ran out very quickly. And of course, now we're relying on whatever comes through the dribs and drabs, as I would call it, through the Rafah crossing, which Marc again reiterated is not fit for purpose to be bringing in the amount of aid that is required. So in terms of providing comfort for the many hundreds of thousands of people that are seeking shelter in many of the shelters across Gaza, we're providing them with non-food items, things like mattresses, blankets, kitchen sets, etc., so that families, women, children, and men who are sleeping on the cold, hard grounds of schools and hospitals, they have some form of relief, some mattresses and some blankets and some comfort. We're delivering ready-to-eat meals to these shelters on a daily basis, preparing around 10,000 meals a day at the moment based on the supplies that are available. That is coming in, and depending on how that situation changes, we will of course increase the output. But on a daily basis, I mean, even yesterday, it's been 2 days, I think, since actually yesterday was our last update because we've not been able to contact the team again. And I think even colleagues from UNRWA were telling us the same, that they couldn't coordinate the delivery of trucks today because of the lack of fuel, which meant that lack of electricity, which meant lack of communication infrastructure. So it is, fuel is a huge lifeline and is one of the biggest needs. But in the meantime, on a daily basis, we're delivering vegetables, food, ready-to-eat meals, hygiene kits, and a very limited amount of water from what's available, using a couple of solar-powered desalination plants, which are just about still running. So the key message really is that although the situation seems out of our hand on a scale that is so huge that we may feel like our impact is minimal, we have to remind ourselves that we still can do what's within our power. And that doesn't just necessarily mean from donating, because of course donations do help and are needed. But the biggest thing we all need right now is a ceasefire and unfettered humanitarian access. Because the teams, I mean, at the moment we're delivering things in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, and in the middle area. But as you've heard, northern Gaza is out of bounds, and there are people that need desperate support, and even aid agencies cannot operate in the current climate while bombs are still dropping down and attacks are taking place. And when an absolute drop in the ocean in terms of what aid is getting in is being delivered, the only way we can really meet the needs of the people, and that is the short-term need, is to call a ceasefire, to cease the fighting, and to allow humanitarian access so that fuel can get in, so that generators can run again, so that machines can start up and running, and lives can be saved and people can be treated. And that is, I think, the biggest thing that we need right now, which is why the pressure has to continue on the international community to ensure that that comes and that happens. And the longer that it continues as it is, the death toll rises. And unfortunately, that's what the situation is at the moment.
No, thank you, Zia. And I think that's a really, really good comprehensive way of looking at things, and also reminding us all how difficult it is for people on the ground and how vulnerable they also are, whether that be aid workers, even media and press trying to cover it. If I can come back to you all again, and then I'll bring in some questions from the floor. So Marc, I recall something really powerful that you said when we were having a conversation, that, you didn't want UNRWA to be there forever, so the idea is that you wanted to build infrastructure and, allow the Palestinians to have something of their own, to build that, whether it's education or schooling. And I thought it might be really insightful for people coming, because the humanitarian situation, as we know, it's deteriorating, but there are some fixes if aid is allowed in, if there's a ceasefire and people are allowed to actually operate. But beyond the ceasefire, there's also got to be peace building. And I think it'd be really good now moving to kind of like a post-ceasefire reality, which we should also be thinking about. And recall Marta saying that we need the siege to end, we need occupation to end. And so it would be really great to provide a little bit of insight in terms of that strategic long-term thinking you're also looking at, as to how do we rebuild? How do we actually provide infrastructure? What are the critical things that Palestinians and Gazans are going to need beyond this to continue?
Thank you, Sarah. Just to say first that I agree fully with your colleague Zia on the call for a ceasefire. This is what we're also calling for as UNRWA, but also as the UN at the highest level. The Secretary General has been quite clear on that, and we hope, and just for everyone's information, there's been a UN Security Council resolution calling for pauses in the conflict, which for us is not enough, and not enough. That doesn't give us, all of us humanitarians on the ground, enough time to repair the lives and of the people on the ground. So it's just not sufficient. Look, we yes, UNRWA, we are a temporary organization, so we aim at disappearing. We hope one day to be able to disappear, but we would disappear only when a just and fair solution is found to the issue of Palestine refugees. Hence, all that we've built over years, the infrastructure, again, that is supposed to be moved to whoever takes over. Everywhere where we are, so whoever takes over the Palestinian refugees, and we're talking about all the 5 fields of operations, but in Gaza, again, where in Gaza, for instance, we've got 305 installations, 305 premises that are there, and hopefully at some stage, someone will take over. So there's no clear way forward now. I think that, again, the priority is to end the bloodshed. The priority is to stop the fighting and to, again, put some order in the lives of the Palestinians in Gaza in general. We aware that there are some discussions. What we say to everyone, please make sure that public services continue. I think it's very important. Us as UNRWA and the UN in general, but also humanitarian that we all are, we're not able to provide those public services. Someone will need to take care of the sewage system, or the cleaning of the streets, all things that are not in the mandate of all of us here on that panel, that will have to be taken care by professionals, and the professions are there in Gaza. So let's not destroy what we have. We have already the basis for states. We have the basis for institutions, and we need to preserve that as much as we can.
Yeah, no, really excellent, Marc. And you're so right. It's kind of like that social fabric, like who's taking care of people, everyone's fixing it. But really, until there's a state with infrastructure, with all the provisions, simple things we take for granted, like going to the bathroom, having water. It was raining the other day as well, having sufficient shelters. If I can come back to you, Richard, we know that a number of, for the medical community in particular, this has been a very, very dark, dangerous, and difficult time. We've seen vigils outside Parliament. We've seen statements, we've seen horrifying kind of statements. Of course, many of your colleagues and you'll have many people on the ground who are part of that. In terms of that, particularly because of the Palestinian Red Crescent and ambulances and hospitals, how do you see the provision of healthcare in particular? How do you see that medical community? Are people going to just continue to be displaced? Part of this webinar was really talking about the refugee side, being a refugee in your own home, essentially, is what we're talking about. They are in their own home, they're in their own country and state. How do you kind of foresee that story or that playing out? And again, in terms of that question around rebuilding or post-ceasefire reality, what are the kinds of things that are in the discussions for the Red Crescent and the Red Cross as well?
I mean, I think the first thing is whatever humanitarian aid, it can't be a substitute for the dying of people in the conflict. That is the crisis, and and so we have to find a way to de-escalate the conflict. There has to be a recognition of the need to protect civilians, which isn't there at the moment, and there needs to be unimpeded, sustained humanitarian access. I mean, we've got waterborne diseases. People don't have access to water. The sewage systems are collapsing. Gaza had a relatively sophisticated, although challenged, infrastructure. So fuel has to be there. Otherwise, you can't run the centers. You can't run the hospitals. So, there's got to be a flow of fuel into Gaza. And that's got to be at a much bigger scale than it is at the moment. But equally, you can't bring the fuel if you can't actually have the medical staff in the centers feeling safe and able to do their job. And so, there's so many things that have to be sorted and fixed in just the next 6 weeks, just to keep the population of Gaza alive, let alone any basic idea of dignity in their life. And I mean, it's a horrendous situation. I've never in my 30 years had the stress of a humanitarian crisis like this, where actually we're so impotent and our ability to do so little because of the nature of what's happened in the last 4 weeks. It's horrendous. And so, the first thing for us is how to get the system working again. We need ambulances resupplied, and then we need the safety to be able to deliver. So the call of the UN to open up other corridors rather than just Rafah is very critical. But somehow we've got to reduce the violence that's going on and the murder that actually is resulting in, an impossible situation for the civilians, where too many lives are being lost. So our priority is very much on the short term. We're going to set up a field hospital in Gaza with the Palestinian Red Crescent because the infrastructure has been broken in the hospitals that they operate from. We have a logistics capacity that we put in Egypt to support the Egyptian Red Crescent as they've been given the responsibility with the Egyptian government to really ramp up the logistics with the UN to get supplies into Gaza. So there's just so many things that are kind of occupying us on a daily basis. The idea of sort of what beyond, for me, feels so difficult to sort of grasp. I mean, the National Society is part of the social fabric of for the Palestinian people and in Gaza and in the West Bank. And obviously they will one day get back to their normal longer term activities, running hospitals, running clinics, and providing psychosocial support and other things. But at the moment, what's going to be like in 6 weeks' time? What will it be like in 12 weeks' time? That's what I think is consuming us and worrying us, and that we're all in this together to try and really do something to transform what is a completely inadequate situation at the moment. Tragic.
No, thank you, Richard. I think we're all feeling what you're saying, to be honest. I don't think this is completely unprecedented. The conversations that we're having at all levels, at all parts of society here in the UK, it is impacting every single conversation, every single aspect of our lives, and even our sleep. And then coming to you, Zia, obviously, this is a critical situation, and particularly for those who want to do some kind of good. This is a humanitarian conversation, so we're not going to get into the politics of it. But in terms of humanitarian organizations and the conversations they're having between each other, in terms of the charitable sector, what kind of pressures are being put on? And is there some reflections that you have in terms of how we can critically rebuild, what kind of needs to be a focal point, and what Islamic Relief is going to be, I guess, looking at in terms of the next 6 to 12 weeks?
Yeah, I think on the back of the vote in the Commons yesterday, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling probably, as Richard said, feeling like our ability to have impact is minimal. But what I would say is what we saw yesterday was not the end, but a step in the process in bringing about change. To see front bench politicians on both sides, especially in the shadow cabinet and the shadow benches, to resign their positions to be able to vote for a ceasefire, says something. It says that the campaigning work that's been done, the marches that have been taking place, the amplification of the voice of the people of Palestine on social media, all of this is having impact. And I don't think we should underestimate or undermine the difference that impact has made. Yes, it's not enough. Yes, humanitarian pauses are not enough. To pause the bombing for a few hours to feed a child only to kill that child the following day makes no sense to anyone. So the humanitarian pause is nowhere near enough, and a ceasefire is needed. But what we cannot do at this stage is relent and back off and say, okay, we tried, there was a vote, and we didn't succeed. I don't think that is an option, especially for us who are in the West, where we know that our government, the US government and others have the ability to exert pressure on the Israeli authorities to cease fire and to stop the killing. We have to continue raising our voice, and we have to continue pressuring the people that we have sent to Westminster. So I think from a UK perspective, the campaigning work must continue. The pressure must be maintained. If it wasn't for the pressure, if it wasn't for the campaigning, if it wasn't for the writing to MPs and the marches and all of those things, we probably wouldn't even have humanitarian pauses right now. So I think the first thing is to not underestimate the impact of what we are doing and what we must continue to do. So that's number one. Do not be dejected over the result of the vote yesterday. There's of course politics involved. The fact that the amendment came from the SNP and the wording from the Labour Party's amendment was not strong enough in most people's opinion. And so because it was from another party and the politics that ensued in backing that was an issue, but we must keep continuing to pressure. And of course, the pressure and engagement that we have been doing alongside colleagues across the sector. We've met with leaders of several of the main parties in British politics, as well as senior members of cabinet, to continue engagement and to pressure them and to continue pushing the crisis and the need of the Palestinian people, to try to push them to act and to, again, keep that pressure on. We are doing that behind the scenes. We're doing it publicly. The community and the British public generally are putting that pressure, and that needs to continue. But I think, of course, from the humanitarian aspect on the ground, we have to keep continuing the work for whatever we can access. There's questions in the chat about, is the aid getting to the people? How are you kind of identifying who to deliver food to? Most organizations have their own matrix of how they allocate resources to the people that have been affected, and Islamic Relief is no different. So we have a matrix system of scoring need based on, for example, households that are either female-headed or have people within them that have disabilities, or if there are orphan children, or if there are those that are vulnerable and have health issues, they are scored higher and they are prioritized in terms of distributing certain items of aid that are required. And I think similar other organizations are doing the same. So from our perspective, the humanitarian interventions continue with whatever supplies we have access to, but the pressure has to continue to ensure that the humanitarian access is provided, because look, the fuel has run out. The two main telecoms providers in Palestine have said that there are almost blackout once again because fuel has run out, generators no longer operating, and without electricity, their communication infrastructure is going to go into basically shutdown. And that means humanitarian convoys of trucks going in cannot be coordinated. It means we cannot communicate and coordinate with our staff. It affects the transfer of funds. It affects absolutely everything. So yeah, the key thing is not to give up. I know that more efforts are being organized to engage our politicians and to put pressure on our government. That has to continue, and people have to continue pushing and raising the awareness and not losing energy, because if nothing else, that's the least that the people of Palestine deserve from us.
No, absolutely, and I think very apt. I think we had a session with the Palestinian ambassador, and he made it very clear that we have to use all channels of communication, all kind of lobbies and access to corridors of power. And even putting this session on is about highlighting realities and also offering people that insight and support so that you can go and say, okay, this is actually something real, but there are people on the ground right now as we speak doing their bit, doing whatever they can to make sure the provision of food, water, education, schools. I've seen at some of the UNRWA shelters, children just singing, and still, I think Islamic Relief was someone dressed up or something. We've seen that despite all the darkness, there's always some level of humanity that people are bringing to the conversation, to the table. And we've seen really inspiring stories from journalists and the press, and people sharing on social media what's happening. And that in some ways keeps the cause and the spirit of the cause alive. And if I can come around maybe some from concluding reflections and coming back to you, Marc, we understand where we're at in terms of the critical situation. The United Nations has made it perfectly clear in terms of what needs to happen right now. And I think there is global solidarity on this. This is not an issue where people are, terribly divided. The average person, 76% of Britons, for example, believe in a ceasefire and they want to see an end to the violence. But I think maybe a message to everyone who has attended today, if there's a couple of points that you think are really important to take away from the session or even from the work that you're doing, that would be really important to share that message on to others. And even, the UNRWA's been around for a very long time. The situation, as we're talking about today, is at the peak. We've never been here before, but we have been in deep and difficult times in Palestine and Gaza before. So maybe there's some kind of reassurance or reflection you want to offer just in the kind of concluding part of this webinar. Oh, there we go.
I said I was myself living in Gaza many years ago. I lived in Gaza for 5 years, and really sharing, everyday life with Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And I know, I've witnessed personally the generosity of those people, the kindness of the people on the ground. Now we're talking about rebuilding, everything, including lives of people, right, in Gaza. Gaza was already like a very traumatized place, traumatized in the sense that through all the conflict that colleagues have talked about in the past, 2009, 12, 14, and you name it, you had generations of Palestinian refugees, in particular children, who were traumatized. So that also has to be repaired. We have ourselves, psychologists working with those children, but we also have to remember that the psychologists are also suffering from the current situation. So we also have, of course, impact what happened on Israel. I think we cannot deny it. On the Israeli side, some people have suffered, and so what we see, the communities, really the rift in the communities is growing, and that's actually difficult. We want peace. We've all said it. I started with the fact saying that UNRWA should disappear because we should find a solution for the Palestinian refugee question. But that can only be achieved through peace. And now we're so far away from peace because communities don't look at each other, don't want to hear each other. And I think that's also a work when you talk about repair. That's a work that we have to do, and it's also our responsibility as the UN, as religious groups, and we talked to Christian groups, we talked to Jewish groups, that we all need to do, try to bring down some calm and again make sure that people start looking at each other as humans again.
Well, really apt and very poignant, Marc. And I think that's very true of all of our communities and very true of today, that we have to find some way to talk and some way to come together, because ultimately we do all want a peaceful existence. And just coming to you, Richard, very quickly again, are there some concluding reflections that you have? Obviously, many of your colleagues on the field and all over the world. What do you think is important for people to take away today?
Well, we have a president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the first time a woman is the president of it. And she was in Paris last week. And this is what she said. And that, for me, she urges states to use all their influence to ensure international humanitarian law is respected and implemented. The Geneva Conventions are practical. Killing civilians and ill treatment are prohibited. The wounded and sick must be cared for, protected, and respected. People detained must be treated humanely and with dignity. Hostage taking is prohibited and hostages should be immediately released and unharmed. Civilian infrastructure that people depend on to live, including electricity and water and networks, must be spared. Irrespective of any military siege, the parties must ensure that civilians have access to basic necessities, including medical care. And then she ends, and it's very rare for the ICRT she ends by saying, we are confronted with a catastrophic moral failing, one that the world must not tolerate. And for me, that's what I'm feeling at the moment. You know, we have to get the rules of war respected. We've got to de-escalate this conflict, and then we've got to get aid and support to the Palestinians in Gaza as quickly as possible in a safe way.
Brilliant, Richard. Thank you so much. And very, very apt, I think, very apt reflections. And then finally, Zia, just some concluding reflections from yourself. Obviously, it's a very, very difficult time. Prayer and compassion and is really important from a faith point of view for all of us. But I'm really glad that you gave that message that we cannot lose hope. So maybe you just want to finish on I guess, a similar note.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the same boat in terms of the panelists, in terms of what we want. We all recognize that the crisis in Gaza didn't start on the 7th of October, and we all know that for the people to get what they really need and what they really deserve, the blockade needs to end, and the occupation needs to end, and that's ultimately the outcome that we all need for the people of Palestine to live with freedom and with dignity. I think you know, from a final, I guess, reflection perspective, like I say, you know, we've seen this happen time and time again. It's not the first time that we've been responding to a crisis like this. And you know, each time the houses have been destroyed, the schools have been bombed, the hospitals have been damaged, and lives have been taken, and many have been killed. Islamic Relief and other agencies have been there when the dust has settled, when the cameras have gone away, and when people have moved on with their lives. And we've helped rebuild those lives, rebuild those homes, rebuild those schools, and rebuild the infrastructure that has been destroyed, along with other humanitarian organizations, including those that are on the panel tonight. In this darkest of hours, we have to continue to stand with the people of Palestine. And that happens in several ways. But I will finish by reminding myself and everyone of the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, in which he said that when we see evil in this world, we try to stop it in three ways. The first, if we can, we stop it with our hands. And if we cannot, then we speak out against it. And if we cannot, then we have hatred for it in our hearts. And that is the weakest of our faith, in that the final thing that we can do. Of course, we may not be in a position far removed physically to intervene with our hands, and we may not be in positions of power, some of us, to actually physically stop the killing ourselves. And if we are, then it is our duty to do that. But if we're not, then we have the ability to speak out. We have the ability to advocate on their behalf. We have the ability to campaign and to raise the awareness and to speak out about it. And in addition to that, what we can do is continue to pray for the people of Palestine, pray for better days, pray for peace, pray for ease for those that are suffering, pray for those that are stuck in this continuous cycle of violence, pray for patience for the mothers that are holding their wounded and dying children, pray for strength for those that have been injured, and pray for Jannah for those that have passed.
Ameen. Thank you so much, Zia. What a beautiful dua. I want to thank all of our guests and everybody who's joined. It's 9:02, but we were a little bit late to start. This has been a really, really important and eye-opening session. Maybe in some ways, whilst it's painful to share, it's also healing to know that actually there's a kind of commitment here. People are on it. People are doing something, and they're prepared to face whatever comes to do the best for humanity. So I want to thank all of you and the many agencies out there who are on the ground, who are fearless in pursuit of saving lives, who are fearless in pursuit of justice, and also of our common humanity together. And the Muslim Council of Britain will continue to do our bit, and wherever we can, in terms of pressuring the government, political leadership for ceasefire, in terms of supporting communities through this difficult time, but also in terms of educating and helping people understand the actual issues and how to lobby for them in the best possible way. I thank you, everybody. We will send this recording and also some notes and links to everybody's causes today and how you can get involved and support in whichever way you can. We'll be setting up more of these community briefing sessions in the coming weeks as well, so stay tuned. And thank you for joining us, and thank you all, Marc, Richard and Zia for taking time to join us today as well. Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.